Let's go. What is going on, all you awesome superhero aficionados? This is the Heroes and Mutants podcast, your number one source of superhero talk. I'm Nick with my co-hosts today, Jimmy, Eric, and Ruben unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Busy, a little bit caught up. Eric's sick, so wishing him continued health and wealth. But with all that being said, obviously Thor Love and Thunder just came out recently, and it is our job today to discuss if it was a thunderous knockout or if it didn't exactly hit that ceiling of what we were hoping for, or if it continued that success leading on from Ragnarok. So, all that being said, let's get into it today. So, overall, what did you think of the story in Love and Thunder, Jimmy? Did you think that it needed to be reworked a little bit? Did you like what the ideas and the story that they presented with it, or what did you think of it just as a collective whole?
I actually think the story was good, and I think it was a good concept with good ideas. I like Gore the God Butcher as a villain a lot. I mean, he's a little different from how he is in the comics, but I still thought he was a good villain for this movie. My biggest problem isn't the story. It's just the fact that the movie doesn't even seem to take its own story very seriously. And
right.
I've had some criticisms of some MCU movies where, like, in the action scenes or in the most tense moments, they turn everything into a joke and kind of like undercut what they're going for. And I think this takes that idea and pumps it up to like 11. And we've seen like joking Marvel movies. Like James Gunn is like a great example because his Guardians movies are very funny. They're very humorous, but he manages to be humorous without ever undercutting the seriousness of the story or the nature of what's going on. This one, I felt that there were too many jokes, and there's too often Thor was played as a punchline. I'm not saying that these movies should be humorless or that we can't see a little bit more of a comedic side, but I think that was my biggest problem with the movie, is that everything seemed like every time something good happened, it seemed like it was undercut with a joke, and it just made the movie seem like fluff sometimes. And it was unfortunate because I actually think the story is a good story if it were treated with a little bit more seriousness. It's a step down from Ragnarok for me, unfortunately. I really liked Taika Waititi as a director.
Mm-hmm.
He said recently that he doesn't read the comics, and that's fine. I don't think you need to read the comics to make a good superhero movie necessarily. But he's also going so far as to suggest that he doesn't take it very seriously. And I do think that that's an issue. If it's one thing, if you're directing a comic book movie and you're not familiar with the comics, you could still make something good with it. But I feel like he's winking too much because he himself doesn't take this material seriously. And I think that becomes a problem with the movie. I think it's an entertaining movie, but it's not one that I see myself revisiting too often with how it played out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of reviews focusing on that, more so with that this is a massive downturn from Thor's arc, especially from when you take it back to the very beginning on the first Thor movie, where he was just this irresponsible man-child who didn't have any responsibility or wasn't empathetic and didn't see the need to protect others and truly had to understand and discover what it meant to be worthy. And even after that, in the other Avengers movies, you had him not, even though he did have a little bit of a goofy side, there was still that seriousness into the character in those high key moments, or in those moments that really necessitated it. And I feel like just here, it's gotten to the point where he's just become a running gag or just a joke and a punchline, and he doesn't take anything seriously. And he's not, granted, obviously he's been around for a long time. He's been around for centuries and he has all this experience, so it's led him to be pretty cocky. But even then too, even approaching bad, like he doesn't, there's just no point where anything is taken seriously. And I'm just wondering why that is. Like there's just always moments undercut, like you had said, with so many jokes and moments that should be tense and that should be serious minded, but yet all like they have to feel the need to interject some kind of joke or some kind of funny, witty moment. And the jokes, I feel like there are some genuine funny moments and there are some genuine laughs. But aside from that, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, are we going to be taking this a little bit more seriously? Is this really going to, I just feel like things go on way too long. And I don't know if it's just the fact that people expect it, or if that's just, like you had said, Taika Waititi's just his
attitude,
his understanding of it. Oh, well, none of this is serious, or I'm not really serious about the source material. So I don't know what it is, but it just I don't understand why that is a thing.
I mean, I think the best things that come out of this movie come from Jane and Gore the God Butcher. I think in the moments with them, you get peeks at what this movie could have been if
Yeah,
they have just committed to some of those aspects. Because I really think that the Jane storyline is an emotional storyline,
it is. Oh yeah.
and I think there is some genuine emotion at the end. I just feel it would have landed a lot better if the entire movie wasn't filled wall to wall with gags. And granted, some of these are funny gags. I'm not going to say I didn't laugh at some of it
Yeah,
or didn't find it humorous, but after a
yeah.
while, I was like into it. I'm like, okay, is this going to be taken seriously? I mean, example, the gods in this movie. I understand the idea of giving Gore the God Butcher motivation, and I really like the opening scene where he confronts the god and realizes that he's kind of been betrayed and his daughter died for nothing really. He sacrificed and devoted his life, and he's told by this god that there's no reward, there's no afterlife for you, and there's no afterlife for you, so your species is meant to be in service of us. And by making all of the gods like gluttonous, like the only thing that they care about is that damn orgy that they want to get on. They're obviously very sexual, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But
I mean, it's not like something that's uncommon to mythology. Like
no, it's not
that's
uncommon to Greek
yeah.
mythology. I totally get that. But there are times where I'm like, this movie is not doing me it is not doing a good enough job of convincing me that Gore the God Butcher is wrong. If this is how all the gods behave, that like if they get there and then everything is, I don't want to do with it, I don't want to deal with it, I'm going to pass it off, I don't really care. It just makes the villain seem like he has more of a point than he should have. And I'm not certain we're supposed to be rooting for Gore the God Butcher, but there are times where I'm like, you guys are not really making a good argument for why he's wrong with the behavior of all the gods in this movie.
I
And
mean, yeah, I wouldn't say like we're exactly supposed to root for him, but understand where he's coming from. I think
yeah,
even though, yeah, I would have liked a little bit more of a further explanation of that. And the way they approach Gore's storyline is very simple and straightforward. You don't really see too much of that struggle. You see his family, obviously, his planet is inhospitable and is going through starvation and famine. And then you see that he's still very much believing in the God, in his God, but then to come across and confront the truth and the reality that the God doesn't care about him and just sees him as expendable. Obviously, that causes him to lash out and
mhm.
have the Necro Sword become one with him and kind of feed off of that, all of that pain and all that suffering. So I wouldn't say it's anything like we're not exactly supposed to root for him, but understand where he's coming from and see that he does have a point. Especially Thor seems to be the only god who is good natured and actually trying to help people, as opposed to just partaking in orgies and partaking in their own selfish desires and seeing humans as though are the ones that worship them as only that and expendable. So I think a lot of that, even though it wasn't really the formula, I wasn't really at the forefront, I really think that was a big part of his storyline and all that.
I did like Christian Bale in this movie.
Oh,
I
he was
thought
great.
he was good. I mean, I kind of feel like he's acting in a different movie from the rest of the cast. I feel
Yeah.
like the rest of the cast isn't a lighthearted comedy, and Christian Bale, not that he doesn't have funny moments, he has a
Yeah.
couple of funny moments,
There's definitely a few moments where he's hamming it up and he's chewing a lot of scenery,
but it's
especially like that one where he appears behind the kids. Oh, what a neat story! Like, but there are moments that he has like where he's actually talking like with Jane and Thor, where he's actually fully connecting with them and understanding their plight and trying to make them understand where he's coming from
I think
and the
he has
futileness of it all. Like,
I think he even has some sympathy for them. But I think
yeah,
what the
more
difference is,
so Jane.
yeah, more so Jane. I think the big difference is that even though that Christian Bale's Gore has like his funny moments don't feel like they're a joke. They seem sinister. Like when he appears behind the kids and he's clapping, yeah, that's him hamming it up, but that's
Mhm.
pretty fucking sinister when you think
Yeah,
of
it does.
yeah,
Yeah, if anything, it's like more black comedy
yeah,
than anything. So
yeah, and I like the stuff with all the black and white and how it kind of bleaches the color out when they're around him. And I mean, most of the movie is pretty colorful,
mhm.
but I just feel like even then there could have been more of Christian Bale's Gore in the movie. I feel like we could have used a little bit more of it, but I get why there's not more of it. it doesn't fit in with the rest of the movie. And like I said, it feels like it comes from something completely different. It feels like it's coming from a movie outside, like outside movie that's entering this comedy.
Yeah, and especially when you think about the runtime, because I think the runtime was under 2 hours. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if they just could have added like 10 more minutes, and we could have seen at least a little bit of Gore doing some butchering. I'm wondering if that could have been something, because I would have wanted to. Granted, we know that he's a very formidable villain from the well, I won't say villain, but that he's a very formidable presence in the beginning of the movie, especially because of the Necro Sword in his possession. But I just I honestly, it just feels kind of weird because he's not really in the movie that much. He has like
No,
maybe what 20, 25 minutes of screen time, maybe 30 at the most.
I would
And
say 30
that's
is really
that's
stretching.
supposed to be the main villain. And I'm thinking about it is that they probably realized, wait, we can't have a character like Gore the God Butcher in this movie for that long or that much amount of time, because then that's going to conflict with the tone and the setting and the mood that we're establishing. Because they can't really, aside from those moments where he does kind of have that really dark comedy, there's not really stuff that is played for laughs. It's more of kind of very,
Right.
very twisted sense of humor.
Yeah. But
But
I mean,
overall, his presence was like, I just feel as good as he was, I wish we could have seen a little bit more. And they actually, Christian Bale said in an interview that that was something that they shot more
hmm.
for this film, and that it would have been darker and it would have been something that would have elevated the tone a little bit. But I know he had talked about, obviously, we see that he has tattoos and markings on his body. So his people obviously believe in that. And that after he kills Null, after he kills his god Rapu, that there's a scene of him where he's cutting off his tattoos
Hmm.
and further renouncing his god, all the other gods, and further just going to show exactly like that he's someone who believes so much in this destroying all the gods that he's willing to go through an extreme amount of pain because that's what he believes in. So there's stuff like that that I wish we could have seen a little bit more. Yeah, it would have necessitated a little bit more of a darker tone, but
I
I think
think
it would
that's
have
what this
been
movie needed, a
exactly.
slightly darker tone. And I think 10, 20 minutes of a darker extra gore stuff could have made this a little bit more serious. It still would have been an overall jokey movie. And I'm not suggesting that Thor needs to be dark and brooding. That's not what Thor is. I don't I'm like I
Yeah, I would never say that either.
yeah, I was like, sometimes when I've talked to a couple people and I think they got the wrong idea of what I was saying. I don't think Thor should be a dark movie, but I think it should be a little more serious. And I don't think serious and dark are the same thing. And I think sometimes people conflate the two things. So I just wish it would have been taken a little bit more serious. I wish we could have seen more of the Guardians in this movie too.
I mean,
That's
that's the way a lot of people were speculating in the very beginning that this was going to be as Guardians of the Galaxy.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have minded
Because
that.
just the way that it got left off in Endgame, we see them. Obviously, they're in a partnership, and that they're going to be good. Like Thor is joining them in their travels and protecting the galaxy. So I think I was wondering too, like, how is that? I'm like, don't tell me they're just going to leave in the first 15, 20 minutes to go out on another mission while Thor just goes to deal with Gore and what's going on with him. Then
It
I
was
kind of had a feeling that was going to happen.
So did I, but it doesn't it feel a little purposeless because it seems like Endgame set them up as this new partnership because of, like it seemed like part of the bond comes from the fact that they lost they lost people together and they're not like the MCU is not going to be the same. So going forward, it kind of feels like it's setting up this partnership between Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think there's some good chemistry there too.
Yeah,
And then when we finally do get it, it's just for 20 minutes. Yeah, they went on some adventures, and most of the adventures that they went on already, I guess, took place off screen. And then you get the 20 minutes in here. But I feel like we could have gotten more of it. And that's a weird thing. The MCU movies have never been afraid of being long or pushing their longer runtimes. And I feel like with this and Multiverse of Madness, they're getting shorter. And I feel like sometimes it doesn't need to be as long as Endgame, obviously, because this is not as large or an epic of a story and it's not on the same scale. But I think that 15, 20 extra minutes could have really gone far in fleshing certain things out and making this feel a little bit, I don't know, weightier than it actually was.
yeah, definitely. That's the thing too. It's like a lot of these films beforehand, they weren't. They were at a very minimum, what, like 2 hours, 15 minutes, 2 hours, 20, and now things are just getting shorter and shorter, and like that's become a common thing. And we saw that amongst like even some DC movies. Like I know the theatrical cut of Justice League was like under 2 hours too. So I'm wondering, is that just going to be something to where it's going to be the norm for the MCU? I'm assuming it probably won't, but it seems like it's going that direction. The last two movies were under 2 hours, so that's something that definitely can be a worrisome thing in the future because then it just leaves out, okay, how how much more could they have added into this, or how much, even just like 10 minutes. I think in 10 minutes of gore doing god butchering, I think we would have that would have made it a little bit better for me.
And it would have. And there's a part of me that like I was wondering for a while if I was projecting Taika Waititi not taking this seriously until I actually heard some interviews where he's discussing it. And he even seems like really dismissive and laughing off like the special effects in the movie. Basically kind of suggesting in an interview with Tessa Thompson where they're sitting there giggling that the special effects aren't good. And I'm like, dude, this is your movie. Like, you're not supposed to be out there saying stuff like that. You should, and not only that, as a director, you're kind of leading this. You're the leader of the team on this film. And how would you feel as a special effects artist, or the people who are like? And I've heard that the MCU deadlines for like the visual effects are harsh. They're like almost unrealistic, that a lot of people who worked in VFX have been quitting because of Marvel, because they get contracted to Marvel, where they asked them to do work in the matter of a week that they say would in 6 months would be almost like pushing it to the limit in 6 months, and they want some of this work done in a week. And a lot of people are quitting in frustration. And I do see some of that. I mean, the CGI is fine, but there are some parts where it looks bad. And I don't think it looks good that the director just kind of blasted off and like, dude, that's your team.
One of the
You
worst
should not be dogging these people.
one of the worst effect shots is the one where Korg was relating the story in the very beginning about the space Viking, and you see like him charging into battle, and his mom, well, as a baby, well, not him charging, but his mom is running, and she's holding him in one of those like little carriers things that parents wear.
Yeah.
And the scene where she jumps into the camera, that's a really bad. If you see on her face, it just looks really, really bad. I'm like, oh, no wonder they cut away so quickly, because that I'm like, and I saw it the second time, and I was like, oh my god, it's even worse the second time.
Yeah, because you could really zero in on it the second time. But yeah, and I think that's like kind of a problem with the whole attitude of the movie. It seems like it was rushed out. Taika Waititi, who is a really good director and did a really good job with Thor Ragnarok, is not taking it seriously. It seems like Disney just wants to push it out regardless if the product is ready. It just starts to feel a little bit depersonalized, and it shouldn't feel like this is just a product that you guys are slapping out. Here you go enjoy it, go watch it, there it is. And like, it deserves these movies deserve a little bit more care and a little bit more.
I'm wondering too, because like I said, Taika Waititi is a very, very talented director.
Yeah, he is.
In other movies, he does a good job of balancing the humor and the drama.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering here if it's just like in the way you expressed his demeanor and his mood and tone in these interviews, where it kind of seemed like he wasn't really caring. I'm wondering if this was just a paycheck to him, if this was just something to funnel his passion projects and not be something to where he was putting on his A game or putting his best foot forward, so that way he could go and work on these other passion projects, because that's actually what he wanted to do. Granted, I'm not saying that he didn't care about this movie at all, but
I get that feeling too, though. I mean, and the thing is, I didn't get that feeling off of Thor Ragnarok, and there's a part of me that feels like he thinks, well, maybe he's thinking, I already did one, and I already put myself into it. Now I'm just going to start cashing in on the paychecks. And I'm not saying that there's not care or there's not craft put into this movie. Obviously, there is, but there just seems to be such a smirkiness in the attitude, and knowing how that they just kind of shoved this out and forced it out before the visual effects were even ready, kind of shows that even it's not just Taika Waititi. Is like, does Disney even care if these movies are good, or do they only care about the profit? And here's the thing, whether or not it's good is going to affect the profit, the bottom line, because it's going to make a difference when it comes to word of mouth. And we saw it. And look, I loved Multiverse of Madness. I even watching it again, my opinion about it is still the same. I mean, obviously, I still think they could have explored the multiverse to a much greater extent. But I really, really enjoyed it a lot as a movie. Multiverse of Madness, I disagree with most audience members, but the fact of the matter is it was not well received, and it had major drop-offs from week to week to week.
Even talking to coworkers, they all said the same thing. Oh God, it wasn't good, or oh, I didn't really like it. Oh, I couldn't take my kids to it. Like, yeah, I mean, Sam Raimi's directing it. You wouldn't really take your kids to see a Sam Raimi movie aside from Spider-Man, of course.
Yeah. And I dug that movie, but the point is that it proves that audiences' perception of a movie is going to affect the box office.
Oh yeah.
And I've seen a lot of negative reactions to this movie. This is not a beloved movie by MCU fans. And I imagine this having the same trajectory as Multiverse of Madness is, having major drop-off from week to week. So the reason Disney should care a little bit more instead of just shoving it out like this so fast is because it's going to end up making a difference. Like the Batman. The Batman did not open as big as Multiverse of Madness, but it performed better week after week after week. It was a steady performer and still made like solid money week after week. And the main reason is because people liked it. People thought it was a good movie. People went out and saw it and they recommended it, and it even got good audience scores, good reviews. So I think that's what carried the movie and made it a success. It had a good opening weekend, but what made it successful is that it stayed strong in the weeks after because audiences kept returning for it, and the word of mouth kept spreading that this was a good movie and it was worth seeing on a big screen. I don't see that happening with Thor.
Yeah.
It opened a little bit bigger than the Batman, which obviously Marvel is this brand, but I don't expect it to have legs like the Batman does. I expect this to perform like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
I actually think it might drop off worse than that because
it might.
I don't feel it's as good as a movie as Multiverse of Madness.
No, I don't.
It just seems like people in this week that it's been out, people are already talking about how bad a movie it is and how they didn't like it. And this is just, it just came out. Even in the opening weekend, I already heard people complaining and like, oh my God, this is not a good movie. Or like, what were they thinking? How did this movie get created? Or this is what they went with.
I mean, it's so bad that there's petitions to bring Kenneth how do you say his last name? Kenneth Branagh?
Branagh?
Yeah, Kenneth Branagh back.
Branagh.
Nobody liked those movies when they came out. Those are probably some of the least loved Marvel movies. Was the first.
The Dark World, but I say Thor definitely has things about it, especially when he like. I really appreciate it for that fact that it allowed that transition from Thor to that irresponsible man-child to empathetic hero who fights for the greater good. I actually think that was a more compelling use of Thor even back then compared to now. Like now he's just become like a running gag and a punchline. And it also brings me to that thought that it just seems like Marvel truly didn't know what to do with him after Thor. And obviously you see him teaming up with the other Avengers. It's easy to throw him in there and not have to worry so much about his own development. Or even so, like I actually thought he was also portrayed better with the Russos. It makes me think, how would the Russos have handled a Thor film? And seeing what they did with him in those little snippets that we got in Infinity War, where he's talking to Rocket on the ship about his loss. Yeah, he's using humor a little bit, but he's using it to disguise his pain and disguise his own insecurity. And then obviously we see that further in Endgame, even though people were playing that off for laughs or, oh, this is funny, and that there was that deeper, darker storyline in that background. So I'm wondering to myself, what do you think? Could the Russos have pulled off a better use of Thor and not resorted to him just being a punchline?
I think so. And I mean, to give credit or understanding, I get that Thor is kind of a difficult character to adapt because there's a lot of things about Thor that are inherently silly that you're going to have, but there's also, it comes from a very serious piece of Greek mythology. And I think it's kind of hard for a lot of people to balance that out or to get that right balance. Like, it's a very difficult thing. James Gunn pulls it off all the time. He always manages to like make it serious and weighty and emotional and make it fair. While still,
that's what obviously we appreciated so much about the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, because that was him allowing just full creative control. Okay, I don't have to worry about a PG-13 rating. Okay, I'm gonna go ham with this, and we saw how great that was.
But even with the PG-13 rating, he still does better than this.
Yeah.
So I think it's just they're not. I think they're having just real difficulty in figuring out what to do with this character and how to adapt him properly and how to do it right. And I think it's just a struggle for a lot of filmmakers. But I do think that the Russos probably could have done a better job just based on how Thor was portrayed in Infinity War and Endgame. Granted, in Endgame, the Thor becoming really overweight was kind of silly. I get that. That was probably one of the sillier things that the Russos did with Thor. But
I mean, it makes sense as where
it
he's
makes
coming
sense.
from when
It
you
makes
think of
sense to the
all the
story.
pain and the suffering and the guilt that he feels for you. Just the way he completely did a 180 the minute that Hulk brought up Thanos, and you can just see just that pain emulating on his face and how much that really caused him to change into what he is now or what he was at that time. So
I mean, I
that's
actually
more
thought,
so what I thought
yeah,
about it. I know people were playing it out for laughs, but there was
yeah.
something more compelling there for sure.
There was something a little more compelling. I mean, that's probably one of the funniest parts in the movie is at the beginning when they're explaining, like they take you back to overweight Thor and showing him getting like back into shape and trying
Yeah.
to get back to himself. So some of that was kind of funny. I appreciated that. But um it's just after a while it started to feel too silly. I did like Jane though. I thought
Yeah.
that she was an interesting character. I thought that she had a good character arc. I think she came
I think that was the good thing about this movie too, where I was actually really on board because then they're doing those callbacks and they're doing something that feels familiar, and we're allowed to see her come back into this when we thought after the Dark World, okay, she's probably not going to appear ever again. But in my mind, I'm like, they got to be doing the Mighty Thor at some point. Like that would just be missing out on a huge opportunity. And so I think it really added a more emotional stake in the story, and that there was more that it allowed on that kind of aspect, but also there wasn't, even though it was there, they kind of didn't really do anything with it, especially till the very end. And that was something that I thought could have been also handled a little bit better. But it was cool to see her back in this again. We saw Darcy, we saw Dr. Selvig.
Yeah, I think Dr. Sel. Yeah,
It and its father. Well, the thing, the clown, that's his father. But
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
but
I feel like Natalie Portman did some of the heavy lifting in it. It's just because she's a damn good actress when it comes to it. And I think that where the script is missing some of like the depth in her storyline, she just brings it to it with her acting, her presence. She seems like she took this seriously based on how her performance played out. And I think with a lesser actress, it probably would have came across a lot weaker, but they're lucky that they got somebody who could sell it the way that she did. It
definitely. What did you think about Gore's redesign for this film? Did you like what they did with it and that they made him look more human, or did you prefer the more monstrous symbiote inspired design from the comics?
I kind of like the comics design, but I get why they did this. I understand, right. And it's because it gives the actor a little bit more of a chance to shine when you make them a little bit more human. I mean, it's gonna sound weird, but he almost reminded me of like some late 90s like metal star like Marilyn Manson or something like that. He looked like he was, sometimes when you were just him, I was like, dude, this guy's like in a Marilyn Manson video while the rest of the movie's in a lighthearted comedy. Yeah. But I thought it was cool. It's not, obviously Gore isn't the most faithful thing, but that isn't a problem so long as it's handled well. And I think Gore was handled well. There's just not enough of it. And I feel like more of it would have taken the story a lot further. And like I said, the movie didn't convince me entirely that he was wrong. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, that was something where I was a little bit on the fence of. I know that we saw that background, that behind the scenes shot of him with the white robes on. I was like, oh, they're probably going to add, like, maybe they're going to be doing some kind of CG with him, and they're going to be making him more monstrous, like in the comics. And then once we saw in the trailer that it's pretty much the same design and that he looks completely the same from the background, the behind the scenes shot, I was a little bit more on the fence about it because I just thought he looked so cool in the comics, and not so much that he was like muscular. I think it fit in with him to have a slimmer, smaller physique than Thor, just to show that kind of contradiction and that comparison between them. But I overall, I think it worked for what they were going for, and just allowing, I know YTT said in an interview that they didn't go with the monstrous design because it would have been very similar to Voldemort. and you can kind of see that,
I could totally see it.
bald, pale, with no nose. Obviously, there would have definitely been those comparisons to Voldemort,
I
especially
think
amongst the audience who doesn't know the source material. So
yeah, to be honest, they might be right because I think a lot of audience members would have cracked jokes on it and it would have been memed. It would have turned into a meme. So I do get the point.
I was just a little disappointed that we didn't get any kind of nod or any kind of talking about Null. In the comics, Thor gets the sword from, it's called All Black, the Necro Sword, from Null. Null is actually the creator of the symbiotes, and so he has like some kind of symbiote-like power also in the comics, and he's able to produce tendrils and all that. So I was hoping that we would have had some kind of nod or some kind of introduction to Null, and that could have also been something to further explore because now we know that it's all canon with Venom and the symbiote. So I'm like, are we ever going to get Null? And unfortunately, we didn't get that. But for what they went with more a simplistic design and something that was very grounded and more realistic for Gore's portrayal. That was pretty cool. I think the thing also too that this film I didn't appreciate that it did was just the pacing. Things sort of just happened. Thor. Gore already gets the Necro Sword, and he's already going slaying gods. All we see is a little monitor of that with the distress calls. And then Jane all of a sudden hears Mjolnir call out to her and felt compelled to go. And all of a sudden it reassembles for her because Thor unwittingly extended the spell to her.
I can't, there are so many examples of that I can't even recall them all. That when I was watching it, it feels like this is like a movie where things just happen. The narrative isn't that organic. It doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't really lead you from point A to point B the way that it should. And it just feels like the plot points are just happening because they need to happen. Not that there's any justification. Almost like it's going through the motions. And that did bother me a little bit while I was watching it.
More so, I think the biggest thing was the whole explanation of Mjolnir. Because I'm like, it's not so much that they were able to pick up the pieces of Mjolnir, because that's in the same spot where Loki sent Odin and where he died. But it just is like Thor would have never tried to like reassemble Mjolnir, like maybe try to pick it up. And how was it able to just reassemble with Jane? I don't exactly understand that whole part.
To be honest, and you know why you don't understand it? Because the writers didn't really think it through. They just put it there. If you can sit there and try to puzzle out, well, what's the logical? There isn't a logical reason.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is all fantasy, so it's not logical.
Yeah.
But even within your own story, you kind of create a certain type of internal story logic that makes sense. I think that's important for anything that takes place in like any kind of fantasy realm. Yes, it's not true to reality, but within that world, you can kind of structure rules that make sense and a certain type of logic.
Because I mean, I'm not the type. I always hated those people that always just point out plot holes, like, "Oh, how did this happen? This should have never happened. This is a little too convenient and too much of a coincidence." But
that shit gets
in terms of story writing and narrative, there should definitely be some kind of structure on how things happen. Otherwise, things just happen and there's no explanation for it. And now too, like Heimdall all of a sudden has a son, so that way he's able to use his magic, so that way Thor can keep in communication with the kids that were stolen. So it's like, okay, Heimdall has a son now. Like, what?
It's a plot contrivance. It's there just to get to the next point, and you could tell the writers didn't think whether or not it actually made sense. They just know, well, the story needs to get here, so we're just going to throw it in, regardless of any kind of internal story logic behind it. And it just has such the script. More than the filmmaking, the script is, I think, the big problem. It has such a slap together quality to it that I find a little bit off-putting watching it.
Yeah.
I would describe it. It's kind of a mildly entertaining. I was never bored while I was watching it.
Yeah.
I even laughed a couple times.
Yeah,
and I
same.
some of the gags. But throughout I was like, and this is what made it worse. It's simultaneously a little too short and it feels too long at the same time. I don't know how to.
I never thought of that. What is it that you mean by it feels too long? Like the jokes just like, run on and on and on, and
it feels like the story is not fleshed out enough, and then it isn't paced in a way that feels right either. Because, like you say, the jokes keep going on, and when the story logic starts to disappear, it kind of ruins the immersion of the movie. Where if a movie's really good and it's long, I don't mind long movies. Long movies are fine, but you have to immerse me in the story and convince me of what's going on. But when I'm like pointing out all of these things in my head that don't make sense, it makes the experience drag on. So it's simultaneously too long and not fleshed out enough at the same time. And I think that's a problem with this. I think
Oh, I never thought of that. My opinion and my assumption of this movie would have just been one that was just too short because of all those
it
points
is
I
too
talked
short.
about, like with Gore and then Jane getting the hammer and then her all of a sudden having all this battle experience, Heimdall having a son, so that way they were able to keep in constant contact with the kids that are missing. Like it just, in my mind, it's just like all things just happened with no real explanation or no real effort to try to justify that in the story or no trying to put it all together in a way that made sense and was concise and cohesive.
Yeah. So I think the script is probably the
Did
big
you
problem.
they had kind of talked about an extension of the relationship between Thor and the hammer. Did you like how they explored that quasi pet significant other kind of relationship between like him and the hammer and then him and Stormbreaker?
I mean, it was kind of amusing and occasionally funny, but I don't think it was explored in any like meaningful way, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't really think it enriches the movie or makes it any better or worse. It's like one of those things that it's just there. It's kind of funny,
Mm,
but I don't really think it adds that much to the movie. I get what they were going for, but no, I don't think it added that much.
yeah. It just brings me back to what Thor had said about Mjolnir when he was relating it to Korg in Ragnarok. We
Hmm.
had after it was already destroyed, and he was explaining to Korg about all the stuff that he could do with it, and then Korg, in his infinite wisdom, obviously says, "Oh well, I assume that this losing this hammer was very important to you and very special, and it was akin to like losing a loved one." And he's like, "Oh, that's a pretty cool way to put it." And it's there, but it's just
It,
there for laughs. I would say
yeah,
there's no real kind of. I think it could have worked for me better, and I'm sitting there laughing at it, but I'm thinking to myself, there's something that could have been a little bit deeper because that was already what was established in Ragnarok. But here, it's just made to be an extended punchline where he's obviously it's like kind of like a quasi pet significant other relationship, but then obviously his new weapon is getting jealous. So it's one of those things like I think could have been pretty powerful and the dynamic was pretty cool, but it just was there for laughs and wasn't really there for anything else and to offer anything of sort. So it just for me, I'm like,
you,
there
you
was
know,
something there.
it's a movie that for me kind of got worse the more that I thought about it. Because when I first saw it, I was like, okay, it wasn't that great, but it was passable. It was entertaining. I wasn't bored. But like, I went with a friend to go see it, and we like went, and then we talked about it for like 5 minutes after. And usually, when I go to a movie with friends, we end up talking about the movie for a long time after. We talked about it for 5 minutes, and then we kind of like forgot about it. It kind of
Yeah.
like didn't like really stick out in my brain. And when I thought about it the next, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't really think about that movie very much. And I was thinking, why didn't I think about it? Why didn't it stick out in my brain? And the more I started thinking and breaking things down, I'm like, yeah, that's why. So it's kind of a movie that got my estimation of it went a little lower, reflecting on it in the days after when I was thinking about it.
Yeah. And it's just like for me, even though the first time that I saw it, I came back home, just laying in bed, like, oh yeah, that wasn't great, but it was decent. Taika could have done better, but
Hmm.
overall it was decent. And then I was sitting there thinking to myself, and I was like, oh, only really talking about the laughs, and even with other people, I just was like, there was really nothing there that this movie had to offer besides laughs. Yeah, they had a pretty cool, compelling story with Gore, wasn't explored and wasn't at the forefront of what it should have been. And I'm wondering if this movie has made me realize that they think either this movie or the MCU is saying that it is better to laugh and easier to make you laugh than to make you feel. And that's a pretty easy way to assess this movie. And if I had to summarize it very quickly, that would be it.
I mean, look, I think I'm gonna compare it to like another Sam Raimi stuff, not Multiverse of Madness, but
Spider-Man 3.
no, we're not gonna
Ah,
compare it to
damn it. That's my
Spider-Man.
favorite movie of all time. How
No,
dare you?
Spider-Man 1 and 2. Spider-Man 1 and 2 are not necessarily like really serious movies like that. And they are filled with a lot of humor and a lot of gags and everything. But there's a sincerity to it. There's like this level that like even as silly as a lot of the stuff in those movies are, when it comes to the dramatic points, you're compelled and you buy it because there's like a real level of emotion put into it. I get
Mhm.
the feeling that Sam Raimi, when he made those movies, he enjoys the source material. He enjoys the silliness of it. He enjoys the humor, but he also takes it very seriously in a certain way. And
Yeah.
I don't see that there. I feel like this is just winking at the audience. Like Taika doesn't really care about this very much. So
Yeah.
let's just play this all for laughs. And like you said, do they think it's just easier to make people laugh than make people feel? And like I said, I'm not against humor in movies. I mean, Sam Raimi did a wonderful job. I don't know about
Oh
Spider-Man
yeah.
3, but in the first two Spider-Mans, yeah,
Come
he
on, we all
did.
laughed at that. We
Yeah,
all
we all
laughed at
laughed at
that.
that.
We
But in
all
the
felt
first,
something. I felt something. I don't know what it is, but I felt something.
yeah, I don't know if it was a good something, but I felt something. But like Sam Raimi managed to like give you all the goofiness that you want, make you smile, make you laugh, and still sell you emotionally, and still manage to give you these well-rounded story arcs, and end off in ways that were moving or kind
Yeah.
of touching, or in a ways that
Yeah.
felt very
But
resonant. Like
even
moment
in
at the end of
comparing that
Spider.
with that, and even comparing it with that, also Spider-Man is known to be a motor mouth in the comics, and a
Yeah,
lot of times heroes are telling them, "Hey, can't you take this a little bit more seriously? Or why do you always have to be cracking jokes?" And obviously, you had touched upon it that he revealed in the comics that it's part of his way to keep himself sane and to
mhm,
not be overtaken by the heightened reality that he lives in, and amongst him being like with gods and super soldiers and all powerful beings. It's his way to kind of ground himself and remind himself of who he is. So it makes sense in discussing who he is and how he relates
yeah.
to all of the craziness around him. But Thor is also somebody who, in the comics, has been portrayed as a serious warrior, space Viking who's been around for a long time. So it just in that it just, and I'm not saying that they didn't do it in a way that didn't make sense like in Ragnarok and other times before, and he's had his goofy moments, but it's just dialed up to 11. And at least in like those Raimi movies, there were moments where Spider-Man needed to take things seriously, or he needed to have more of that kind of tone and had to be in that kind of mood to get through the battle and to get through whatever adversary he was fighting.
I mean, this movie has a potential emotional story arc with
Yeah,
Jane and her cancer,
and
but like,
gore.
if you yeah, if you really think about it, like at the end of Spider-Man, I think that there's real. I mean, it actually like it still works on me to this day. The moment where he's at the grave and he's talking to Mary Jane, and she says all those things to him about how she really feels, and he has to swallow his feelings right there
Mhm.
and say I'll always like care for you but as a friend, and walk away and reject something that he really wanted to have. I think
Mhm.
that moment has real emotional weight, and I think every time I see it, it still lands with me. It gets me like I could feel the pain of it.
Mhm.
And I can see that they're sort of going for something like that with the Thor Jane, but like it doesn't land the same way because the movie didn't take that seriously enough for it to have that kind of emotional pull and weight. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Definitely.
I mean, yeah, it is what it is, but I can't I honestly don't see myself revisiting this movie very often. Like it's not something that I could see myself getting excited. Oh, let's watch Thor Love and Thunder again. I don't see that happening. I mean, as soon as Multiverse of Madness dropped on Disney Plus, I wanted to watch it again right away. This
Yeah.
I didn't get that at all. I
Yeah.
don't consider I'm not going to be counting down the days until I could see it again.
Definitely. I would probably rather watch the first Thor and Ragnarok compared to this one before I revisit it. And I think that's just a common consensus amongst this movie. And
I think
I
probably if you ranked all the MCU movies, I'm not gonna say it's not the worst one, but I think
no,
it's on the lower rung of
it's
the.
just one that's stale, boring. It's just there, but you don't really feel any need to revisit it or rewatch it or really talk
No,
about it amongst the great MCU films. It's just one of those ones that it was there, it happened, and now it's gone.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, even compare it with non-Raimi Spider-Man movies like No Way Home. That had powerful emotional arcs going on it and real
Exactly.
emotion and pain. And when it came down to the stuff that was serious, like Aunt May dying and Peter having to confront these certain things, that had weight to it. There's nothing like that in here, despite the serious moments, despite the best efforts of Christian Bale and Natalie Portman. It just doesn't land the way that it should.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm wondering I don't know what to do with Thor from here. I know Hemsworth had talked about it. He kind of went back and forth. At the beginning, he said he wants to play Thor for as long as possible. To see him grow into old Thor, that would be pretty cool to see. But recently, he also said that it might be time to hang it up, or he doesn't know how long. He doesn't know if he's going to do another movie, which I think is BS. But I do think he's going to be back for sure in another movie. Hopefully, they just go back to the drawing board and think on more what made Thor likable, what made him relatable, and what made him great. And that transition from that first movie. So hopefully they can revisit stuff like that. It was cool to see Sif back again also. She had just essentially a cameo, but it was cool to see that she's alive and well. And I just don't know what you do with Thor from here. Hopefully they get back to something good, because this has fell flat and missed the mark in my opinion. And I just think that there was something there, something that they could have done, something that could have made this movie great, but it was just better to make us laugh than to make us feel.
Yeah, that's
exactly. But more so, like, not even to laugh with the movie, just laugh at how much of a thundering dumbass Thor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's basically what it came down to. What was the name of the name of those screaming animals? The goats,
they just screaming goats is what I remember they called them.
Screaming goats. That was the funniest thing in the movie to me. I don't know why, but that cracked me up every time I saw or heard that. That was probably the funniest gag in the movie to me.
We didn't talk about this either, but what did you think about the portrayal of the other gods in Omnipotent City? Did you like Zeus? Did you like how all of that came to be?
No, I didn't like Zeus in this at all. No, and for the exact reasons I said earlier, because they come across as careless. I get it that they care more about orgies. They don't really care about people. But even the performances seem a little silly to me. I actually didn't realize. I don't know what was wrong with me. I didn't realize that was Russell Crowe.
Oh, you didn't know that was Russell?
No. Wow. Until after, and then it kind of clicked with me, and I was like, if I could compare him to his other when he played Jor-El, yeah.
Yeah.
He played Jor-El in Man of Steel, and I felt like his presence added some weight to there as Jor-El, and some of his line readings were really good. This just seemed like he was there just to be, whatever. And then, I'm not going to lie, this is going to seem like a dumb bias, but after seeing, like, jacked, ripped, like, angry, powerful Zeus in Zack Snyder's Justice League, when they're fighting off Darkseid and all that, like that, this just seems like such a silly joke to me. I'm like, this doesn't cut it after I saw that version of Zeus. This is a silly version of Zeus.
I'm just hoping he's wearing a fat suit, because I have not seen him in a while, and I'm like,
he's not.
Even just 10 years ago when he did Man of Steel, he was, for his age, he was in great shape and he looked good.
He's not wearing a suit. I
figured he wasn't, just because it didn't look like it, but I'm like, please tell me he's wearing a fat suit, that's not real, because I don't remember seeing Russell Crowe like this before. So it's more just very surprising for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm cool with that. I'm sure he's happy. He's rich. He's made so much money, so I don't think he really cares what people think. So that's good for him. I just don't know if that works for the. I guess it works for what Taika Waititi was going for. It was obviously a gluttonous gods. That's how I would describe them, just gluttonous. They feel like they're just hedonists, that the only thing that they care about is just pleasure, constant pleasure, eating and drinking and sex. And that, I think that's the only thing that they really, really care about in this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they shouldn't care about that, because that is such a big part of Greek mythology. And I don't have a problem with them, like, injecting a little bit more sexuality into it. I've even complained that sometimes these movies don't feel like the people in it have any kind of sexuality.
Yeah.
That's fine. But this goes in the opposite direction. We're like, okay, so that's all you care about is the gluttonous stuff at this point. So I felt like they could have done a better balance. Maybe made them a little bit more respectable. Not so silly. These are just like gods that I would laugh at. They're not like serious gods. Like, I would feel like Gore the God Butcher. Like, no, these people, are not worthy of any kind of praise.
Yeah, see, this is further one of those things that I was talking about this movie where we're laughing at the movie but not laughing with it.
Hmm.
Like this, and it's not that it obviously Russell Crowe is a very acclaimed actor,
Yeah, he
one of
is
the
an
greatest of his
actor.
generation, probably even one of the greatest of all time when you think of all of his amazing performances he's done. But it just feels like all of that is just dialed up with the ridiculousness. And I mean, how many times do they talk about orgy? Like, oh, we're gonna go to the orgy, and then he tells Thor like twice, oh, you're not gonna come to the orgy if you don't go back into your seat and shut up. And it's just like really, like
It's
this is
obvious that
all
Thor
like,
doesn't care about the orgy when he's there and he's talking about
yeah,
it. So
obviously. If
yeah,
he's talking about a serious topic and he reveals that he's scared of gore and that we're going to be okay here in Omnipotent City. And hopefully that dynamic will change though, because obviously we see that in the very end where he did survive the lightning bolt to the chest. And we see that he is talking to Hercules and talking it's time that that man feared gods again. So I knew at some point we were gonna have Hercules in there when it was revealed Zeus was gonna be in here. I'm like, there is no way that Hercules is not gonna be in this movie. So in fact, we're gonna be getting Hercules. For people who don't know, Hercules is actually a superhero in the comics. He became part of the Avengers, is a pretty popular, well-known character. So it's cool
but
to
even
see
beside
that.
that, Hercules, even removed from Marvel, Hercules is an iconic piece of pop culture just because
Well, yeah, because he's in
of the
DC.
TV show. Huh? No, because of the
I
TV,
know. Yeah.
because of the TV show.
Yeah.
Because of
Oh.
Kevin Sorbo. Yeah, it was Hercules and Xena, the Warrior Princess. I remember that growing up. Those shows were I used to watch those all the time when I was a kid too.
I didn't watch those actually.
I used to watch Xena more, but I
Oh,
used to
cool,
watch
cool.
Hercules too.
I just
And
remember seeing it like on TV, like when family would watch it and be like, "Oh, that's okay," and I would just go back. But another cool thing that they did in that in one of the gods that was in Omnipotent City was actually Bast, the Panther deity from Black Panther. She was actually sitting in front of Thor, Valkyrie, Korg, and Jane. So you saw that there was a woman wearing like a panther head. That was actually Bast, the Panther deity. So that was cool.
there was one of the gods there in Omnipotent City that did make me laugh. It looked like an egg or something like that. I don't know how to
Oh, it
describe.
was a dumpling, right?
Yeah, the dumpling. I don't know
I
why.
think the dumpling god.
Yeah, that was funny. That actually had me giggling a lot. I'm not gonna say, look,
I'm like,
there is some moments here where I thought, okay, that's pretty
yeah,
damn funny.
yeah.
But
I mean, if they have got a god for everything, so I would assume that they would have a god of dumplings. That is not something that would be too crazy to believe.
yeah, so I'd say
But
I was entertained while I was watching it, mildly entertained, a little frustrated, but entertained and amused. But once it was over, I didn't really think about it much, and then I had to reflect on why I didn't think about it that much, and it became clear to me it wasn't that good.
also too, I never would have thought I would ever hear Hercules. I mean, sorry, Zeus say, "Chill out, baby cake."
Yeah, chill out, baby cake. Yeah, I don't know.
I was wondering because I was trying to like pinpoint his accent. Was his accent supposed to sound kind of Greek? Because it also sounded kind of Italian at times. Like certain words he said, like I thought he was going for like a Greek Italian kind of thing. It wasn't his normal accent, that was for sure.
I think he was going for something like that. Yeah, it wasn't an American accent. No, I
And
think
it wasn't, well, he's from New Zealand, so it's definitely not his original accent.
oh
It just
yeah,
sounded like he was supposed to go for something Greek, maybe a little bit like Italian. Certain words sounded Italian.
vaguely. Yeah, it did have it had like a vague accent that's a little hard to identify, like kind of like a mixture of a couple things, like you said, Italian and a little Greek. But
Interesting choice, but we're probably going to see him in the future. Hercules is coming to the MCU, so that's going to be cool to see.
I mean,
Overall, though,
we're gonna see more of Zeus too, and we've seen these characters can change depending on who's directing the movie. So maybe Zeus will be better when he makes another appearance. And maybe they'll take it seriously at the end where, like he said, we have to be taken seriously again. People don't fear us anymore. We're jokes now.
hopefully,
Hopefully. But we'll see.
hopefully, or maybe he'll just send other gods to do his bidding, and he'll just continue in his glutinous, lustful, sex-obsessed ways because that's what he does.
Yeah, that's what he does. But we'll see.
Overall, though, what do you rank this film?
Being generous, I'll probably give this a 5.
Oh damn.
A 5 out of
I'm
10.
actually more generous than you. I thought I was being the one that was a little too critical of it. So the fact I give it a 6.5.
Okay, upon leaving the theater, I would have given it a 6 if you would have asked me right when I left the theater. But upon reflecting on it for days after, it changed to a 5. So for right now, it's a 5.
Well, it's a good thing. We should have caught you a little bit earlier when you were feeling more generous and more kind and more loving to this film.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So,
like I said, it is mildly entertaining. It will make you laugh. There's things that are there that are definitely warrant that kind of humor, but I just really didn't like. I really didn't like the cinematography. The music was cool. I think the music was probably one of the best things it had going for it, and it had like that 80s nostalgic kind of vibe, a lot of Guns N' Roses. So that's something that's very fitting.
Okay, is it me or does it seem like I don't know? Like it's kind of weird because Taika Waititi has like a very distinct visual style. He seemed like Ragnarok had more of an aesthetic to it than this did.
Like here, it just feels very bland, and I don't really feel
Everything looks like
immersed in the world and
everything looks
wherever
like
they're at.
golden hued and very light. It didn't have like a very memorable look or aesthetic to it. It wasn't particularly cinematic either. And I have to wonder what happened because I feel like Ragnarok had a more eye-popping aesthetic that was kind
Yeah,
of interesting to me.
like
And
I think that further goes into my theory in that I'm not saying that he didn't care, but maybe there wasn't really that much put into it because this was just something for the check and to fund the
yeah,
other passion projects and the things that he actually wanted to do.
I think if you compare it to something like Doctor Strange, which obviously not everybody loved, but whatever else you can say about that movie, you cannot say that it doesn't have a very thought through, carefully constructed aesthetic look to it. Sam Raimi put a lot into the cinematography and crafting a certain visual style and a certain look for it. And I think the
Definitely.
difference is Doctor Strange is a passion project for Sam Raimi, so of course he's going to put more care into it. Like Sam Raimi. I've actually read some things. You know what? Sam Raimi has like 3 superheroes that he loves. Like his 3 defining superheroes. It's
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, Batman, and Doctor Strange. Like he talks about it. Those were the 3. I mean, he's
Well,
even,
that makes sense now because he did do that Doctor Strange Easter egg in Spider-Man 1 or
yeah.
Spider-Man
They
2.
were
No,
just
Spider-Man 2.
in Spider-Man 2. Yeah,
What are we gonna call this guy? Doctor Strange. Ah, that's crap.
let's take
Oh
it.
no, no. First he says Doctor Octopus, and then he says Doctor Strange, and that's pretty good, but it's taken.
But it's taken. Yeah.
I,
So
I didn't even know that was a nod. Honestly, I had no. I obviously I was so wrapped up in Spider-Man, X-Men, Batman that I had no understanding of the
yeah,
Marvel universe as a whole.
and I think that's the big difference is that Sam Raimi is a comic book guy. He loves comic books, and he's said in multiple interviews that like Spider-Man, Batman, and Doctor Strange were the things that he read growing up. I mean, he's even said that he would love to do a Batman movie too. And I think
I would like to see that.
yeah,
Kind of do a more horror infused, maybe detective noir, but a horror kind of thriller
I
thing I could
picture
do.
like
I could.
villains like Man Bat like appearing.
I think he would do
Yeah.
really good at Clayface. I think there's a whole lot of
Like
horror body, like kind of body chemistry, crazy things he can do with that. I would really love to see
I
him do
think
Clayface.
like I would see him doing his villains like like Clayface or Man Bat and stuff.
Mad
like
Hatter, he could probably do
Mad
also.
Hatter too. But yeah, Mad Hatter definitely. But like, and I think that's the biggest difference is, I mean, you can say what you will about Multiverse of Madness. It looked like it was made by somebody who cared about what they were doing, and I don't get that off of this. And as the
Yeah.
difference is because Sam Raimi, like we saw with the Spider-Man movies, has reverence for the source material.
Yeah.
And likes comic books.
And I mean, we
doesn't.
went back to that point and what you and it. I didn't really because I didn't see that, but it makes sense now that you're saying it. That Taika said in an interview that he didn't read the comic books and that he doesn't know about the comic books and he kind of doesn't really have an affinity for them. And not saying that you can't make a good story if you haven't read the comics before, but you at least have to have that patience and you have to have that respect and that understanding. Like this is the source material, this is the spirit of the character, this is who he is, this is who they are. So we're gonna do our best to handle that in a live action setting or in our story. And I just don't get that sense of care and admiration and love. Kind of funny. And love for that as well as like something with, especially with someone like Sam Raimi, because he's a huge comic book fan.
So yeah, so it makes his sense that his stuff looks like it was made by somebody who's into what they're doing.
Yeah. But overall, so 6.5 for me, 5 for Jimmy. So go check this movie out if you guys haven't yet. It's been out for about over a week by the time we dropped this episode. So most people have seen it, but don't expect anything aside from laughs. There is a lot there. It's just not explored and it's not brought about to the best of its abilities. So
I think the story is good. It's
Yeah.
just the way that the narrative played the story out didn't work.
yeah,
Yeah.
disappointing for me for sure. But I guess we'll get the other guys' quick summarization when they appear on the show
next week.
But next episode, we're going to be talking about Miss Marvel. There was a pretty big twist and bombshell that was dropped recently on the last episode. So I can't wait to dissect it and discuss all of that and what's going to happen next with Miss Marvel. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. This is the Heroes and Mutants podcast. Follow us on IG at Heroes and Mutants. Please subscribe to this channel, like, share with your friends, and stay posted. Thank you guys.
See you next time.